The hum of the Mercedes S-Class's engine faded as Danielle Whitaker eased into her designated spot in the private garage beneath Dominion Federal's Shreveport headquarters. The cool, concrete-scented air, a constant in this subterranean world, offered a brief respite from the Louisiana humidity already building outside. 9:32 a.m. flashed on the car's dashboard. Right on schedule. Another Thursday. Another day to steer her ship, her Dominion, through the turbulent waters of high finance. A fleeting image of the board meeting scheduled for next week flickered through her mind. Smooth sailing, she'd anticipated. A routine update on the quarter's robust performance. The irony wouldn't hit her until much later. As she stepped out, Ray, the maintenance worker she often saw during her early morning arrivals, ambled towards her, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Morning to Miss Whitaker," he drawled, a hint of deference coloring his tone. "Morning, Ray," Danielle replied, her voice crisp and businesslike. A practiced smile played on her lips. "You get that plumbing leak fixed on the third floor?" "Yes, ma'am. All patched up. Good." Efficiency was paramount, in plumbing as in banking. She reached for her key card, the sleek platinum a symbol of her authority within these walls. She swiped it through the reader guarding the elevator bank. A harsh buzz reverberated through the quiet garage, a sound that grated on her nerves. It wasn't the familiar click of acceptance, the sound that signaled access, control. It was the sound of denial. Ray shifted uneasily. Her key card didn't work. He mumbled to someone behind her. Danielle turned, her brows furrowed. Two security guards, unfamiliar faces, stood by the garage entrance. They were young, their postures rigid, their expressions carefully neutral. New hires, she guessed. Deshawn's name tag glinted under the fluorescent lights. The other remained nameless, a silent, imposing presence. "Is there a problem?" Danielle asked, keeping her voice even, though a knot of unease began to tighten in her chest. This was unusual. A glitch in the system, perhaps? But the persistent buzz of rejection echoed the unsettling feeling that something was deeply wrong. Deshawn cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to remain in the lobby." "The lobby? Remain?" The words hung in the air, sharp and dissonant. Danielle felt a prickle of irritation, quickly followed by a cold wave of suspicion. This wasn't a system malfunction. This was deliberate. But why? Who would dare? "I'm Danielle Whitaker, CEO of this bank," she stated, her voice laced with steel. "I don't remain anywhere in this building unless I choose to." Her mind raced, sifting through possibilities. A prank? Unlikely. A security drill? Even less so. The thought flickered through her mind, a dark, unwelcome spark. "We understand, ma'am," Deshawn said, his tone apologetic yet firm. "But we have our orders." He avoided her gaze, his discomfort palpable. He was a pawn, she realized, a young man caught in a game he didn't fully understand. The knot in Danielle's chest tightened into a hard ball of anger. She knew instinctively who was behind this. Walter, her hand-picked COO, the protégé she groomed, mentored, trusted. The image of him in her office just yesterday, his smile easy, his words reassuring, now seemed a cruel mockery. And Linda, the quiet, efficient CFO. She'd never suspected had she been blind? Naive? As the elevator doors finally opened, revealing Walter Easley, Linda Prescott, and Damon Price, head of risk management, the pieces clicked into place. Their faces were carefully composed, but the subtle flicker of apprehension in Walter's eyes, the tight set of Linda's jaw, the almost triumphant smirk on Damon's lips, told her everything she needed to know. Betrayal. Calculated, cold-blooded betrayal. "Danielle," Walter began, his voice strained. "We need to talk." "I believe you do," she retorted, her gaze sweeping over the three of them. Each face, once familiar, now seemed alien, etched with lines of deceit she'd never noticed before. "Care to explain why I'm being locked out of my own building?" "It's a complicated situation," Walter stammered, his gaze shifting nervously to Linda, who remained silent, her face an impassive mask. "Complicated?" Danielle's voice dripped with sarcasm. Or just plain treacherous? Damon Price, the ever-opportunistic chameleon, stepped forward. The board has voted to relieve you of your duties, Danielle. Effective immediately. His tone was smug, almost gleeful. He'd always resented her authority, she knew. This was his moment of petty triumph. A surge of fury coursed through Danielle's veins. But she forced herself to remain calm. This wasn't the time for emotional outbursts. This was a battle, and she would fight it with her mind, not her heart. On what grounds? She demanded, her voice unwavering. She already knew the answer. They'd been meticulously laying the groundwork for months. She now realized, whispering in the ears of the board, planting seeds of doubt. Accusations of reckless spending, of jeopardizing the bank's stability. All fabricated, of course. Breach of fiduciary duty. Linda finally spoke, her voice cold and precise. The words, so carefully chosen, so devoid of emotion, cut deeper than any shouted accusation. Danielle's phone vibrated in her pocket. Marion, her lawyer. Perfect timing. She took a deep breath, gathering her strength. I suggest you all consult with your legal counsel, she said, her voice icy. Because you're going to need it. Turning her back on the stunned faces of her betrayers, she stepped into the waiting elevator, her gaze fixed on the ascending numbers, her mind already strategizing her next move. This was far from over. This was just the beginning. The revolving doors whispered as they ushered Danielle into the cool, marble lobby of Dominion Federal. The familiar scent of polished wood and subtly floral air freshener usually brought a sense of calm, a feeling of being home. This morning, it felt cloying, suffocating. Deshawn, the new security guard, stood by the security desk, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on her. Something about his stance, the way he seemed to brace himself, tightened the knot in Danielle's stomach. Just moments ago, her keycard had been rejected at the executive elevator. A minor inconvenience, she had thought, a technical glitch. Now, looking at Deshawn's carefully neutral expression, she knew it was anything but. Good morning, Deshawn, Danielle said, her voice even, though a tremor of unease ran through her. She held up her keycard. Seems to be a problem with my access. Deshawn swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Good morning, Ms. Whitaker. He avoided her gaze, his fingers fidgeting with the radio clipped to his belt. He looked like a rabbit caught in headlights. A rabbit holding the keys to her kingdom. I'm afraid there's been a change in protocol. A change? Danielle echoed. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Her mind raced, sifting through the possibilities. A security upgrade? Unlikely. Not without her authorization. Her gaze swept the lobby, noting the usual Thursday morning bustle. The employees heading to their desks, coffee in hand, oblivious to the subtle tension crackling in the air. Had something happened overnight? Something she hadn't been informed of? The thought was absurd. Dominion Federal was her life's work. She was the lifeblood of this institution. Where's Troy? She asked, referring to the head of security, a man she'd personally vetted and trusted. Deshawn shifted his weight, his discomfort palpable. Troy's been reassigned. A cold dread began to seep into Danielle's veins. Reassigned? Without her knowledge? Impossible. Reassigned? She repeated, the word sharp, laced with disbelief. By whom? Before Deshawn could answer, two more security guards emerged from the back, their movements brisk and purposeful. They flanked Deshawn, creating a silent, imposing wall between Danielle and the elevators. The subtle shift in the lobby's atmosphere was no longer subtle. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Danielle felt a prickle of heat rise in her cheeks. This was a deliberate, calculated display. A public humiliation. Ms. Whitaker, one of the guards said, his voice clipped and professional. He extended a hand. I'm going to need your badge, phone, and any company property. The words hit Danielle like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a glitch. This was a coup. Her mind reeled, struggling to grasp the enormity of the situation. Her badge, her phone, symbols of her authority, her identity. She clutched them tighter, her knuckles turning white. I'm the CEO, she stated, her voice trembling slightly, but laced with steel. "Of this bank." "Understand, ma'am," the guard replied, his tone unwavering. "But the board voted late last night. There's a change in leadership." He held out his hand again, his expression impassive. "Please." The knot in Danielle's stomach twisted tighter. The board. Walter, Linda, Damon. The faces of her hand-picked executive team flashed through her mind, each one now etched with the bitter sting of betrayal. She had mentored them, championed them, trusted them implicitly, and this was how they repaid her. A cold fury began to simmer beneath her shock and disbelief. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to dismantle the carefully constructed facade of calm they had erected. But years of experience had taught her the value of control. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. With a deep, steadying breath, she slowly relinquished her badge and phone. The metal felt cold and heavy in her hand, like a lead weight dragging her down. The guard's fingers brushed against hers as he took the items, a fleeting, impersonal touch that underscored the finality of the act. The lobby was silent now, every eye on her. Danielle could feel the weight of their gazes, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and perhaps a touch of morbid fascination. She lifted her chin, meeting their stares head-on. She wouldn't let them see her broken. She wouldn't give them that power. As the guards escorted her towards the exit, a notification pinged softly from the security desk. Deshawn glanced at the monitor, then back at Danielle, a flicker of something akin to sympathy in his eyes. "Ms. Whitaker," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the low hum of the lobby. "Your access to Dominion Federal Internal Services has been revoked." The words hung in the air, a final, devastating blow. It was over. They had stripped her bare, erased her from the system she had built. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The marble floor beneath her feet felt unsteady. The air grew thin, suffocating. She closed her eyes, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. This couldn't be happening. Not to her, not to Dominion Federal. But even as the despair threatened to consume her, a flicker of something else ignited within her. A spark of defiance. A cold, hard resolve. They may have taken her office, her phone, her access, but they hadn't taken her spirit. They hadn't taken her knowledge. And they certainly hadn't taken her legal standing. She opened her eyes, her gaze locking onto Deshawn. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and steady. "Call Marion," she instructed, her tone brooking no argument. "Tell her I need her at the courthouse. Now." She turned and walked towards the revolving doors, her back straight, her head held high. The whispers followed her, but she didn't falter. She had a bank to reclaim. The sleek, glass doors of Dominion Federal Bank reflected the crisp autumn sky, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within Danielle. The cool metal of her phone felt slick against her trembling hand. They'd locked her out of the building she'd spent the last decade building, brick by metaphorical brick. The absurdity of it clawed at the edges of her composure, a cold dread spreading through her chest. Each breath hitched in her throat, a physical manifestation of the disbelief that warred with the rising tide of fury. She dialed Marion Price, her lawyer, the only person she could trust right now. The brisk, professional tone on the other end was a lifeline. "Marion," Danielle began, her voice tight, barely controlled, "they just locked me out of my own building." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal. How could this be happening? The faces of her executive team, Walter, Linda, Damon, flashed before her eyes, their smiles now twisted into grotesque masks of treachery. "Explain everything, Danielle. From the beginning." Marion's voice, though calm, held an edge of steel that Danielle found strangely reassuring. As Danielle recounted the morning's events, the changed access codes, the bewildered look on the young security guard's face, the closed-door meeting she'd been barred from, a knot tightened in her stomach. Each word she spoke felt like a fresh wound, exposing the raw vulnerability she'd tried so hard to conceal. She could practically hear Marion's sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Give me 20 minutes. I'll call you back." "Do not speak to anyone," Marion instructed, the urgency in her voice finally mirroring Danielle's own. The phone clicked dead, leaving Danielle standing on the bustling sidewalk, a lone island in a sea of oblivious faces. The city noise, the honking cars, the distant sirens, the chatter of passers-by seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the roaring in her ears. She felt exposed, stripped bare of the power and control she'd cultivated so carefully. A shadow fell across her. Walter Easley, his carefully tailored suit and polished shoes, seemed to mock her current state of disarray. He stood before her, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern, though Danielle could detect a flicker of something else in his eyes. Unease? Perhaps even a hint of guilt? Danielle, he began, his voice smooth, practiced. I know this looks bad. You were in that meeting, weren't you? The words were clipped, each syllable laced with ice. He flinched, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Look, this isn't personal, he pleaded, his gaze darting around as if seeking an escape route. The board felt it was time for a change in leadership. A bitter laugh escaped Danielle's lips. A change in leadership? By locking the CEO out of the building? Is that standard corporate procedure now, Walter? He shifted his weight uneasily, avoiding her gaze. This is about the bank, Danielle. Its future. The future? You think betraying my trust and staging a coup is what's best for the bank's future. The anger, simmering beneath the surface, finally erupted. Her voice, though controlled, carried a sharp edge that sliced through the air. Passers-by began to slow down, their curiosity piqued. A few even started filming with their phones. Good. Let them see. When I pulled you out of that disaster at Sterling Union, Danielle continued, her voice rising with each word, each memory fueling her righteous fury. Who stood up for you when no one else would touch your resume? Who mentored you, guided you, gave you the chance to prove yourself? Her eyes bored into him, daring him to deny the truth. Walter's face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked trapped, caught in the spotlight of her accusation and the growing attention of the crowd. The nascent recordings, Danielle knew, would spread like wildfire. The board hadn't accounted for this for her. They underestimated her. The phone vibrated in her hand. Marion, they've made a critical error, Danielle. Marion's voice was crisp, almost triumphant. A monumental one. You still have majority control. You never signed the trust transfer. A wave of relief washed over Danielle, so potent it almost made her knees buckle. The tension that had been coiling in her muscles began to loosen, replaced by a steely resolve. The board had overplayed their hand. They thought they could outmaneuver her, erase her legacy, but they were wrong. Dead wrong. She looked at Walter, his face now ashen, his eyes filled with a dawning comprehension of the magnitude of their mistake. A faint smile played on Danielle's lips, a subtle shift in her expression that spoke volumes. The game had changed. She was no longer on the defensive. She was back in control. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, fueled by the palpable shift in the atmosphere. They sensed the turning tide, the return of the queen to her throne. And Danielle, standing tall amidst the growing whispers and the clicking cameras, felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The silence of her kitchen was a stark contrast to the cacophony that had erupted in the Dominion Federal lobby just hours ago. Sunlight, sharp and intrusive, slanted across the cool marble countertop, illuminating a half-eaten bowl of yogurt and a discarded financial report. Danielle Whitaker, CEO of Dominion Federal, stood motionless, her fingers tracing the rim of a delicate porcelain teacup, a relic from her grandmother. The cup, usually a source of comfort, now felt alien in her hand, a symbol of a life momentarily disrupted, thrown into a disarray she couldn't yet comprehend. Deshawn's nervous stammer, Walter's carefully rehearsed words, Linda's tight-lipped silence, the scene played again and again in her mind's eye, each replay sharpening the edges of her disbelief. She hadn't imagined the betrayal, not truly. Not from them. The faint scent of jasmine tea, usually a calming presence, did little to soothe the gnawing unease that had taken root in her stomach. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to find the center of the storm raging within her. They locked me out, she whispered, the words barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. Locked out of her own building, out of her own company. The absurdity of it threatened to send a fresh wave of anger crashing through her. But beneath the anger, something colder, harder began to solidify. A steely resolve. They had underestimated her. Grossly underestimated her. Marion's voice, calm and measured, echoed in her memory. Danielle, I need you to check your personal safe. The trust transfer documents. Are they signed? The question had struck her as odd at the time. Why would she have signed them? The transfer was a formality, a contingency plan she'd put in place years ago, a safeguard, not an immediate action. She'd always intended to maintain majority control, the cornerstone of her vision for Dominion Federal. With a sudden, decisive movement, Danielle pushed the teacup aside. Her footsteps echoed on the polished wood floor as she crossed the kitchen to the small, unassuming safe tucked away in the pantry. The combination, a sequence of dates etched into her memory, her grandmother's birthday, the day she'd incorporated Dominion Federal, the day her daughter had been born, flowed through her fingers almost unconsciously. The heavy steel door swung open, revealing a stack of neatly organized documents. And there, on top, lay the unsigned trust transfer. A memory, vivid and sharp, flashed before her eyes. Shreveport, Louisiana. A small, dusty office, barely bigger than a closet. The year, 1998. She was 22, fresh out of college, fueled by a relentless ambition and a vision that everyone else had dismissed as naive. Dominion Federal wasn't just a bank to her. It was an embodiment of a promise. A promise to empower the underserved communities her grandmother had tirelessly championed. A promise to build something that would last, something that would matter. She remembered the skeptical looks, the condescending smiles, the outright rejection from investors who saw her youth and her gender as liabilities. But she'd persevered, scraped together every penny, worked 18-hour days, poured her heart and soul into building her dream, brick by painstaking brick. The unsigned document in her hand felt heavy, weighted with the years of struggle, the sacrifices, the unwavering dedication that had brought her here. They thought they could just walk in and take it, take what she had built. A flicker of a smile, cold and sharp as broken glass, touched her lips. They hadn't learned a thing. They'd been too busy basking in the reflected glow of her success to understand the fire that still burned within her. They'd seen her grief, her exhaustion after months of battling her daughter's illness, and mistaken it for weakness. They staged a coup, she murmured, the realization solidifying into a cold, hard certainty. They'd seen an opportunity to seize control, to capitalize on her vulnerability. Walter, Linda, Damon, they were all complicit. Walter, her handpicked successor, the one she had mentored, guided, trusted. The sting of his betrayal was a dull ache in her chest, a stark reminder that loyalty, like trust, could be a fragile thing. They tried, she said, her voice gaining strength, the steel in her gaze hardening. Ownership wasn't given, it was taken. She had learned that lesson early on, clawing her way up from nothing, fighting tooth and nail for every inch of ground she'd gained. The initials Dardeu, Danielle R. Whitaker, inscribed on the corner of the document, were a testament to that fight, a silent declaration of her unwavering resolve. Marion's voice, a steady anchor in the storm, came back to her. You never signed a trust transfer, Danielle. They don't have the legal standing to remove you. The lawyer's words, initially a source of confusion, now resonated with a new clarity. A strategy began to form in Danielle's mind, intricate and sharp like a spider's web. She wouldn't fight them on their terms. She would play her own game, a game they weren't equipped to understand. The silence in the kitchen no longer felt oppressive. It was now a space of contemplation, a strategic command center where she would plot her return. They thought you were mourning, distracted, tired. A voice, her own inner voice, whispered, sharp and insightful. They forgot who taught them how to lead. The ghost of a smile played on her lips. They had forgotten the lessons she had instilled in them, the very principles that had made Dominion Federal the powerhouse it was today. They had forgotten that beneath the polished veneer of the CEO, beneath the grief and the weariness, beat the heart of a fighter. They had underestimated the woman who had built an empire from dust, and they would pay for it. The revolving doors of Dominion Federal Bank whispered open, admitting Danielle Whitaker into the cool, marble-clad lobby. Friday morning, 8:02 a.m. Exactly 24 hours and 2 minutes since she'd been locked out of her own building. The air, usually buzzing with the low hum of commerce and the click-clack of heels on polished floors, held a strange, anticipatory stillness. Danielle inhaled deeply, a faint metallic scent clinging to the air, conditioning the smell of fear, she thought, not entirely unpleasant. Beside her, Marion Price, her lawyer, stood ramrod straight, a briefcase clutched in her hand, radiating an aura of quiet competence that Danielle found oddly reassuring. Deshawn, the young security guard stationed at the desk, visibly stiffened as Danielle approached. He was new, she remembered, barely a week on the job. A pawn, easily manipulated. He fumbled with his radio, his eyes darting nervously between Danielle and the silent elevators behind him. A muscle twitched in her jaw. She'd spent years cultivating a culture of trust and loyalty within these walls, and to see it crumble so easily, replaced by this fear felt like a physical blow. Yet beneath the sting of betrayal, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize. She wouldn't let them win, not without a fight. "Good morning, Deshawn," Danielle said, her voice even and controlled. The sound, echoing slightly in the vast space, seemed to amplify the tension in the air. She could almost taste the apprehension radiating from the young man. Good. Let him feel the weight of the situation. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Ms. Whitaker." He managed a curt nod, avoiding her eyes. He knew, of course. Everyone knew. The whispers must have spread through the building like wildfire. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Her gaze remained steady, unwavering. Inside, a storm raged, a maelstrom of anger and disbelief. But her face, she knew, betrayed nothing. Years of boardroom battles and high-stakes negotiations had honed her ability to mask her emotions, to present a facade of impenetrable calm. Deshawn's hand tightened around his radio. He licked his lips, his gaze flicking towards the security cameras perched high in the corners of the lobby. He was trapped, Danielle knew, caught between his duty and the unspoken pressure from above. She felt a flicker of something akin to pity for him, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold fire of her purpose. "You might want to call upstairs," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "Let them know the owner's here." The word owner hung in the air, a stark reminder of the reality they were trying to deny. The legal intricacies of the situation were complex, but the fundamental truth was simple. Dominion Federal was hers. Deshawn finally made the call, his voice barely a whisper. Danielle could hear the static crackle, followed by a muffled response. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with anticipation. She could almost feel the collective intake of breath on the executive floor, high above. Upstairs in the lavishly appointed boardroom, the news of Danielle's arrival hit like a shockwave. Walter Easley, the COO and the architect of this whole debacle, felt a jolt of adrenaline course through his veins. He'd expected her to fight, of course. Danielle Whitaker wasn't one to back down from a challenge. But he hadn't expected her to return so soon, so composed. He glanced at Linda Prescott, the CFO, her face pale and drawn. Even Damon Price, the head of risk management, usually so cocksure, looked unnerved. "She's in the lobby," Deshawn's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "Alone?" Walter asked, his voice sharper than he intended. A sliver of doubt, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at the edges of his ambition. "No, with counsel and documents." A pause. "That's Marion Price, federal regulatory attorney." The blood drained from Walter's face. Marion Price, a name that carried weight, a name synonymous with meticulousness and unwavering adherence to the law. He hadn't anticipated this. He'd underestimated Danielle, a mistake he was now beginning to regret. Linda cleared her throat nervously. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Walter hesitated. He'd meticulously planned every detail of this takeover, anticipating Danielle's every move. But this was unexpected. He'd envisioned a drawn-out legal battle, weeks, maybe months of negotiations. Not this swift, decisive action. Downstairs in the lobby, the silence stretched on, punctuated only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Danielle glanced at her watch. 8:07 a.m. Time was of the essence. "They've stalled," she murmured to Marion, her voice low. "Let me make a call to the district court and file a temporary injunction." Marion nodded, her expression unreadable. She opened her briefcase, retrieving a thick sheaf of papers. The sight of the legal documents, the tangible evidence of her preparedness, seemed to further unsettle Deshawn. He shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting nervously towards the elevators, as if expecting them to disgorge a battalion of lawyers at any moment. The weight of the moment settled on Danielle, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't just about her position, about reclaiming her title. It was about protecting Dominion Federal, the institution she'd built from the ground up, the institution that held her life's work, her legacy. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, a momentary lapse in her carefully constructed composure. But it passed quickly, replaced by the steely resolve that had always been her greatest strength. She wouldn't break. She wouldn't yield. She would fight for what was rightfully hers. The heavy oak door of the boardroom felt colder than the polished steel of the elevator doors she'd passed moments before. A phantom chill, perhaps a reflection of the ice forming in her veins. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the shadows gathering in the corners of her heart. Danielle paused, the manila folder clutched in her hand, a tangible anchor against the swirling uncertainty. This room, this building, every brick and pane of glass, was hers. She had poured her lifeblood into Dominion Federal, shaping it from a regional player into a national powerhouse. And they thought they could just take it? A flicker of something colder than ice, something sharp and edged with steel, sparked in her chest. Not a chance. She pushed open the door, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden silence that fell over the room. Walter, Linda, Damon, they were all there, seated around the long mahogany table like vultures perched over carcass. Their faces, just yesterday masks of respectful deference, now wore a veneer of uneasy expectancy. Walter shifted in his seat, his gaze flickering to the folder in her hand, then back to her face. Linda, ever the picture of composure, merely raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Only Damon, always the brash one, met her gaze directly, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "Good morning," Danielle said, her voice calm, even each syllable a precise strike against the suffocating tension. The word felt foreign in her mouth, coated in the bitter taste of betrayal. How could she wish them a good morning? How could any morning be good after the gut-wrenching realization that her trust had been so thoroughly misplaced? Inside, a storm raged, a tempest of anger and hurt, but her face remained an impassive mask. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. They wanted her emotional, vulnerable. They wanted to paint her as unstable, hysterical. They wanted to dismiss her righteous anger as feminine fragility. It was an old tactic, a tired trope, and she wouldn't fall prey to it. She placed the folder on the table, the thud of it against the polished wood, a small explosion in the quiet room. "This," she said, her voice gaining a steely edge, "is the original holding agreement, signed and filed, with me as majority stakeholder." She slid the document towards Walter, watching as his carefully constructed facade began to crumble. He reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly, his eyes scanning the legalese with a dawning horror. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Walter began, his voice strained, a tremor of fear threading through his carefully cultivated baritone. "A misunderstanding?" Danielle almost laughed. The meticulously orchestrated plan, the locked doors, the deactivated key card, a misunderstanding. The sheer audacity of it almost took her breath away. A misunderstanding? Danielle repeated, her voice laced with a chilling calm. Is that what we're calling it now, Walter? Locking me out of my own company? A simple misunderstanding. He swallowed hard, avoiding her gaze. Linda remained silent, her eyes fixed on the document, her face pale. Damon shifted again in his chair, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He opened his mouth to speak, but Danielle cut him off. Linda Prescott, CFO, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a shard of glass. You're suspended indefinitely pending an internal audit. Linda's head snapped up, her composure finally cracking. A flicker of fear, raw and naked, crossed her face. And Damon Price, Danielle continued, turning her gaze to the head of risk management. Your access to all systems is revoked. Security will escort you out of the building. Damon's face flushed a deep crimson. The defiance in his eyes was replaced by a mixture of disbelief and anger. He started to protest, but the words died in his throat under the weight of Danielle's gaze. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, pregnant with unspoken accusations and recriminations. The dust motes still danced in the sunlight, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in the room. You wanted me emotional, Danielle said, her voice low, almost a whisper, but carrying the force of a thunderclap. Because it's easier to call a woman unstable than to admit she's outsmarted you. She let the words hang in the air, letting them sink into the silence. She met Walter's gaze, the remnants of his carefully constructed persona crumbling around him like dry leaves. He looked old, suddenly, the youthful ambition that had once drawn her to him replaced by a weariness that seemed to seep from his very pores. I mentored you, Walter, Danielle said, her voice laced with a mixture of disappointment and something akin to grief. I trusted you. The words hung in the air, a stark indictment of his betrayal. He didn't reply, just stared at the document in front of him, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight had gone out of him. The carefully crafted coup, the meticulous plan, had all unraveled in the face of her unwavering resolve. He had underestimated her, miscalculated her strength, and now he was paying the price. Danielle turned to leave, the weight of the past few days pressing down on her, a heavy cloak of exhaustion and disillusionment. But beneath the weariness, a flicker of something else ignited a spark of triumph, a surge of renewed determination. Dominion Federal was hers. She had built it brick by brick, and she would not let it fall into the hands of those who would exploit and destroy it. The fight might have been brutal, the betrayal painful, but she had emerged victorious. And as she walked out of the boardroom, the sunlight on her face felt warm, almost a caress. The shadows hadn't disappeared entirely, but they no longer held the power to consume her. She was still standing, and she was still in control. The biting wind whipped Danielle's charcoal gray suit jacket around her, a stark contrast to the rigid glass and steel of Dominion Federal's headquarters towering behind her. Friday morning. Barely 24 hours had passed since Deshawn, the bewildered security guard with eyes that screamed apology, had barred her entry. 24 hours that had felt like a lifetime, a slow, agonizing drip of disbelief and fury. She hadn't slept. Not really. Short, fragmented snatches of unconsciousness punctuated by the phantom weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. But the exhaustion, the raw emotional hangover of the coup, was masked by a layer of icy composure she had meticulously constructed. This was war, and Danielle Whitaker never went into battle unprepared. The crowd buzzed, a sea of faces blurred by the early morning light. Journalists jostled for position, microphones outstretched like hungry predators. Cameras flashed, momentarily blinding. The whispers, the speculative glances, they all pricked at her, 1,000 tiny needles testing her defenses. But her expression remained fixed, a carefully crafted mask of calm determination. Her gaze swept across the crowd, acknowledging their presence without engaging. This wasn't about them. It was about Dominion. It was about the legacy she had built brick by agonizing brick. Ready, Ms. Whitaker? Marion's voice, steady and reassuring, cut through the cacophony. Danielle nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. She adjusted the microphone, the cool metal a stark reminder of the performance about to begin. Inside, a storm raged. Doubt gnawed at the edges of her resolve. Had she miscalculated? Had she overestimated her influence? The fear, a cold knot in her stomach, was a foreign sensation, one she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge in years. But she shoved it down, burying it deep beneath layers of calculated strategy. She took a deep breath, the crisp morning air filling her lungs, a small act of defiance against the suffocating weight of the situation. This was her company, her life's work, and she wouldn't let a handful of ambitious vipers steal it from her. Good morning. Her voice, amplified by the speakers, rang out, clear and strong, silencing the murmurs. The sudden hush was more powerful than any shout. I'm Danielle Whitaker, and as many of you know, I am the CEO of Dominion Federal Bank. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing the weight of her title, her rightful claim, to settle. Internally, she replayed the image of Walter Easley, his face a mixture of awkwardness and forced authority, attempting to occupy her office. The memory fueled the fire in her belly. He had been her protege, someone she'd nurtured, mentored, trusted. The sting of his betrayal was a sharp, persistent ache. Linda Prescott, the ever-silent CFO, lurking in the shadows, nodding in agreement with every treacherous word Walter uttered. And Damon Price, risk management, his smug expression a testament to his misplaced confidence. They had underestimated her. They had mistaken her compassion for weakness. I stand before you today to address the rumors and speculation surrounding my absence from Dominion Federal yesterday. Each word was precise, deliberate, a carefully placed stone in the foundation of her argument. I did not resign. I was not asked to step down. I was removed without warning, without process, and without cause. The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. The murmurs in the crowd intensified, a ripple of shock and disbelief spreading through the assembled journalists. This wasn't the narrative they had been expecting. This wasn't the quiet, dignified exit of a disgraced CEO. This was a declaration of war. I gave them opportunity, she thought, the memory of countless meetings, countless attempts to steer the board toward a more ethical, sustainable path, flashing through her mind. She'd seen the greed in their eyes, the insatiable hunger for more, but she'd held onto the hope that reason would prevail. She'd been naive. She knew that now. What happened hurt, she continued, her voice softening slightly, a calculated vulnerability designed to resonate with the audience. I trusted people who saw me as a stepping stone. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a gesture of weary disappointment. But this isn't about personal betrayal. This is about Dominion Federal, about the thousands of employees who dedicate their lives to this institution, about the millions of customers who trust us with their financial well-being. Her gaze swept across the crowd again, connecting with individual faces, forging a silent alliance. She saw the flicker of understanding in their eyes, the dawning realization that this wasn't just a boardroom power struggle. This was a fight for the soul of a company. I built Dominion from the ground up. I poured my heart and soul into this institution, and I will not stand idly by while it's dismantled by those who prioritize personal gain over the well-being of our employees and customers. The steel in her voice was unmistakable. The mask of composure had slipped, revealing the burning intensity of her resolve. I'm not the victim, she thought, a small, almost feral smile playing on her lips. I'm the blueprint. They may have the keys to the building, but they don't have the key to Dominion's success. That's something they can never take from me. This morning, with the support of my legal team, and in accordance with the bylaws of this institution, I have filed an injunction against the board of directors, challenging the legality of their actions. I am confident that justice will prevail and that I will be reinstated as CEO of Dominion Federal Bank. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The cameras flashed, a blinding barrage of light. The whispers intensified, morphing into a low hum of excitement. The narrative had shifted. The ousted So wasn't retreating. She was counterattacking, and she was winning. The questions came then, a barrage of inquiries fired at her from every direction. She answered them calmly, confidently, each response a carefully crafted piece of her strategy. She spoke of due process, of corporate governance, of the importance of ethical leadership. She didn't shy away from the difficult questions, the accusations of mismanagement whispered by the board. She addressed them head-on, dismantling their arguments with facts, with logic, with the unwavering conviction of someone who knew their worth. By the time the press conference ended, the atmosphere had palpably shifted. The air of uncertainty, of speculation, had been replaced by a buzz of anticipation, of support. Danielle Whitaker, the ousted CO, had become Danielle Whitaker, the defiant leader, the champion of her company. The whispers had changed. They were no longer talking about her downfall. They were talking about her comeback. Sunlight, sharp and unforgiving, sliced through the blinds of Danielle's office, casting stripes across the pristine mahogany desk. Dust motes danced in the beams, a silent ballet in a space that had felt, just days ago, like a battlefield. The leather of her chair, still warm from her body, held the faint ghost of her perfume. She ran a hand over the smooth surface, the familiar texture grounding her in the reality of her reclaimed territory. It hadn't been easy wrestling back control of Dominion Federal, but she was here, back at her rightful place. The fight had left its mark, though. A dull ache pulsed behind her temples, a constant reminder of the sleepless nights, the endless strategizing, the sheer, visceral exhaustion of it all. A soft knock echoed in the quiet office. Danielle's hand stilled on the desk. "Come in." Her voice, usually crisp and commanding, held a tremor she quickly suppressed. The door opened, revealing Grace, her personal assistant, a quiet, competent woman whose loyalty had never wavered. Even during the darkest hours, when the vultures had circled, Grace had remained steadfast, a silent sentinel at Danielle's back. "Everything set for the board meeting, Ms. Whitaker?" Grace asked, her gaze steady, but a flicker of something unreadable in its depths. "Yes, thank you, Grace." Danielle forced a smile, but the muscles in her face felt stiff, unfamiliar with the gesture. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She could see the hesitation in Grace's posture, the slight tightening of her lips. There was something she wanted to say, something unspoken hanging in the air. "Is there anything else?" Danielle prompted, her voice softening. It was more than just an employer-employee relationship they shared. There was a mutual respect, an unspoken understanding. Grace took a deep breath, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "There is actually Ms. Whitaker." She paused, her gaze dropping to the folder in her hands. "I need to apologize." Danielle tilted her head, a ripple of unease spreading through her. "Apologize? For what, Grace?" "For not telling you. I suspected something was brewing." Grace's voice was barely above a whisper, her words laced with guilt. "I overheard snippets of conversations, saw hushed meetings, but I dismissed them. I thought I was being paranoid." Danielle's breath hitched. The unease blossomed into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. "You knew." The words escaped her lips, barely audible, laced with a mixture of betrayal and relief. Perhaps a small part of her had wanted someone to know, to share the burden of her suspicion. Grace nodded, her gaze meeting Danielle's directly. "I knew, didn't I?" Her voice cracked, the facade of professional composure finally crumbling. "I knew, and I did nothing. I convinced myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting." A wave of weariness washed over Danielle. She leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking beneath her. The fight had taken its toll. The realization that even Grace, her most trusted confidant, had sensed the impending betrayal, yet had hesitated, stung, but also offered a strange sort of solace. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined the subtle shifts in the atmosphere, the veiled glances, the hushed whispers. It had been real. "Next time," Danielle said, her voice quiet but firm, "trust your gut." The words were as much for herself as they were for Grace. Grace's eyes filled with tears. They were so brazen, so sure of themselves. A flicker of anger sparked in Danielle's chest. "They always are," she said, her voice regaining its steel edge. "But next time, we won't be quiet." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the room. Danielle closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the past few days settle upon her. The emotional toll, the sleepless nights, the constant battle against the insidious whispers of doubt, it had been a heavy burden to bear alone. When she opened her eyes, Grace was watching her, a mixture of concern and admiration in her gaze. "You handled it brilliantly, Ms. Whitaker." They never stood a chance. Danielle managed a small, genuine smile this time, a smile that reached her eyes. "They don't get to write the ending, Grace," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "I do." She rose from her chair, the weariness replaced by a surge of renewed purpose. The board meeting loomed, a final confrontation, a chance to solidify her victory. She straightened her jacket, the crisp fabric a reminder of the armor she had forged around herself. The fight wasn't over, not yet. But she was ready. She was always ready. The vultures had underestimated her. They had mistaken her quiet strength for weakness. They had learned, to their detriment, that Danielle R. Whitaker did not break. She bent, she adapted, she strategized. And she always came back stronger. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the Monday morning sun, a stark contrast to the pall hanging over the boardroom. Danielle Whitaker sat at the head, her posture ramrod straight, a stillness that radiated an unsettling power. The air crackled with unspoken tension, thick enough to choke on. She could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of apprehension and resentment. Good. Let them feel it. Let them stew in the consequences of their betrayal. This wasn't the same Danielle Whitaker they thought they'd ousted last Thursday. This was a Danielle forged in the fires of betrayal, sharper, harder. Her fingers, laced together atop the table, felt cold, a strange disconnect from the simmering fury beneath her composed exterior. She had spent the weekend meticulously preparing, dissecting every document, every email, every whispered conversation she could recall. She wouldn't give them an inch. Not this time. Her gaze swept over the assembled faces. Walter easily, his usual confident demeanor replaced with a nervous fidgeting, avoided her eyes. Linda Prescott, ever the picture of composed control, sat stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Damon Price, however, met her stare with a defiant glint in his eye, a flicker of the arrogance that had fueled his betrayal. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on Danielle's lips. He was the weakest link, the most predictable, the easiest to break. "I've reviewed the minutes from the last 4 closed-door sessions," she began, her voice even, controlled, each word a precisely aimed dart. Inside, a maelstrom of emotions churned, a tempest she fought to contain. Disappointment, anger, a profound sense of violation all swirling within her. She pushed it down, locking it away behind a wall of glacial calm. This wasn't about her feelings. This was about Dominion Federal. This was about the thousands of people who relied on the bank, the small businesses they supported, the families they served. She wouldn't let them down. Not again. A rustling of papers, a cough, the squeak of a chair, the silence in the room amplified every small sound. They knew what was coming. The air thickened with anticipation. Walter shifted again, his discomfort palpable. Linda's knuckles, white against the dark wood, betrayed her carefully constructed composure. Only Damon remained outwardly unmoved, his defiance a brittle mask. "3 of you," Danielle continued, her gaze settling on Walter, Linda, and finally, Damon, authorized actions without proper board-wide votes. Actions that directly contravened established protocols and, in some instances, skirted dangerously close to legal violations. Each word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. She saw a flicker of fear in Walter's eyes, a tightening of Linda's jaw, a hardening of Damon's gaze. Good. Let them fear. Fear was a powerful motivator. Walter, Danielle addressed him directly, her voice softening slightly, a calculated tactic. She knew his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities. You were my protégé. I trusted you. The words were laced with a subtle undercurrent of reproach, a gentle reminder of his betrayal. He flinched as if struck. The carefully constructed facade of composure he had maintained throughout the meeting began to crumble. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Shame? Regret? Perhaps. But beneath it all, Danielle sensed a flicker of something else. Fear. Linda remained silent, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her, a picture of controlled impassivity. But Danielle saw the slight tremor in her hands, the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. Linda was the most difficult to read, her emotions hidden behind layers of professional detachment. But even she wasn't immune to the weight of the situation. Damon, however, showed no sign of remorse. His defiance remained unbroken, his gaze unwavering. He met Danielle's stare head-on, a silent challenge. Danielle allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. His bravado was a shield, a desperate attempt to hide the fear that gnawed at him. She would break him, slowly, methodically. Damon Price, she said, her voice crisp and clear, devoid of any emotion. Your access to all systems is revoked, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. The words were delivered without fanfare, a simple statement of fact. But the impact was immediate and devastating. Damon's face paled, the blood draining from his cheeks. His defiant posture crumbled, replaced by a stunned disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked from Danielle to Walter to Linda, as if seeking their support, their intervention. But they remained silent, their gazes averted. He was alone. He finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. You can't do this." Danielle's gaze remained unwavering, her voice cold and hard. "I already have." Security. 2 uniformed guards entered the room, their presence amplifying the sense of finality. They approached Damon, their movements swift and efficient. He looked at Danielle, his eyes pleading, his face a mask of desperation. But there was no mercy in her gaze, only a cold, unwavering resolve. The guards escorted him out, his protests fading into the corridor. The silence that followed was deafening. Danielle let it hang in the air, a tangible reminder of her authority, of the shift in power. She looked at Walter and Linda, her gaze lingering on each of them in turn. "This," she said, her voice low but firm, "is not a game. I don't run this place to make you comfortable. I run it to make sure people outside these walls get a fair chance." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I expect your full cooperation in restoring Dominion Federal to its former standing. Anything less will be dealt with swiftly and decisively." She stood up, her movements deliberate, her posture radiating an aura of command. "This meeting is adjourned." She turned and walked out, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their actions. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But this was a victory. A small victory, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. And it was only the beginning. Sunlight, sharp and insistent, sliced through the blinds of her office, painting stripes across the polished mahogany desk. Danielle Whitaker ran a finger along the edge. The cool would a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside her. It was Monday, just Monday. Only 4 days since she had been locked out of her own building, her own life. The image of Deshawn, the young security guard with wide, uncertain eyes, barring her entry, still burned in her mind. They used him, she thought, the acid of betrayal biting at the edges of her control. A pawn. He probably thought he was following protocol. The memory of Walter's careful neutrality, the almost imperceptible flinch in his jaw as he confirmed the board's decision, was a deeper wound. Her protégé, someone she had mentored, trusted, believed in. Had it all been a performance? A meticulously crafted facade waiting for the opportune moment to crumble, revealing the ambition that lurked beneath. The weight of the chair felt unfamiliar, almost alien. It had been hers for years, a symbol of her hard-won success, of the empire she'd built brick by painstaking brick. Dominion Federal wasn't just a bank. It was an embodiment of her vision, a testament to her unwavering dedication. And they had tried to steal it. The thought, raw and visceral, sparked a flicker of the anger that had consumed her throughout the weekend. But it was different now, a cooler, more focused flame. They thought you were mourning, distracted, tired. Marion's words echoed in her mind, a quiet reminder of the vulnerabilities they had preyed upon. Her father's passing, a blow that had shaken her to the core, had become their weapon. They had seen grief, not weakness, but an opening, a chance to seize what they believed they deserved. Danielle closed her eyes, inhaling slowly, the scent of old leather and faint traces of her favorite jasmine tea filling her lungs. Grief remained a constant ache, but now, interwoven with it, was a steely resolve. They had underestimated her. They had mistaken her grief-stricken silence for surrender. They would learn their mistake. The phone buzzed, a sharp intrusion in the quiet. It was Marion. "They're ready for you, Danielle. The boardroom is set. Security has been re-instructed." There was a subtle undercurrent of satisfaction in her lawyer's voice. Danielle could picture her, crisp suit, meticulous notes, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. She actually pulled it off. Someone had whispered in the elevator on Friday. The words, meant to be dismissive, had instead filled Danielle with a strange sense of pride. She had orchestrated this counteroffensive with surgical precision, using the media, her legal standing, and the inherent fear of exposure that haunted those who operated in the shadows. The board's attempt to oust her had been clumsy, riddled with legal loopholes, a desperate grab for power that had backfired spectacularly. "Thank you, Marion," Danielle replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the complex emotions swirling within. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." She stood, smoothing down the impeccable lines of her navy suit, adjusting the pearl earrings that had been a gift from her father. Each movement was deliberate, a silent affirmation of her control. The news had broken late Sunday night. Dominion Federal CEO, Danielle R. Whitaker, reinstated. The board, facing allegations of financial misconduct, forced to resign. The headlines were succinct, brutal, and entirely accurate. As she walked down the familiar corridor towards the boardroom, the whispers followed her. "She's back," someone murmured, their voice laced with a mixture of awe and apprehension. They thought they could get away with it. Another voice, this one filled with a touch of malicious glee. Danielle didn't react. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, her expression unreadable. She knew they were watching her, assessing, trying to gauge the extent of the damage. They would see strength. They would see resolve. They would see the woman they had tried to break, standing taller, more formidable than ever before. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Walter, Linda, and Damon sat around the large mahogany table, their faces pale, their eyes avoiding hers. The remnants of their arrogance, their self-assuredness, had evaporated, replaced by a palpable fear. They looked small, insignificant in the face of their own unraveling. "She doesn't own the company anymore," Damon had bragged to a colleague just days ago. The words, relayed to Danielle by a loyal staff member, had been a turning point. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about protecting the legacy she had built, the livelihoods of the thousands who depended on Dominion Federal, the very foundation upon which her vision rested. Danielle took her seat at the head of the table, her presence filling the room. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the quiet hum of the air conditioning. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The weight of her gaze, the unwavering steel in her eyes, spoke volumes. This wasn't just about reclaiming her position. It was about rebuilding, restructuring, ensuring that such a blatant betrayal could never happen again. This wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about changing the rules of the war. The whispers outside, the hushed conversations, the speculative glances, They were all symptoms of a deeper malaise, a culture of fear and ambition that had allowed this coup to fester. And that, Danielle realized, was what needed to change. She had returned, not just as CEO, but as a force of reckoning, a harbinger of a new era. An era where loyalty wasn't a weakness, and ambition wasn't a license to betray. The task ahead was daunting, but as she looked at the shattered remnants of the old guard, a sense of grim satisfaction settled within her. The game had changed, and she, Danielle R. Whitaker, was holding all the cards. The crisp autumn air nipped at Danielle's exposed skin, the faint scent of fallen leaves mingling with the exhaust fumes of the city. Monday. Only 72 hours ago, she'd stood on this very spot, locked out, a stranger at the gates of her own kingdom. Now, a sea of faces, her employees, her people stretched before her, their expectant gazes fixed on the makeshift podium erected on the bank's wide front steps. A microphone stand, slightly too short for her frame, waited. It felt strangely symbolic. They tried to diminish her, cut her down a size. But here she was, larger than life, about to address the very institution they thought they'd stolen from her. Danielle adjusted the lapel of her charcoal gray suit, the fabric cool against her fingertips. Underneath, the silk blouse, a vibrant crimson, pulsed like a second heartbeat, a reminder of the fire within. The last few days have been a blur of legal maneuvering, press conferences, and sleepless nights fueled by righteous anger. But the fatigue, the gnawing uncertainty that had clawed at her in the stolen hours of the weekend, had receded, replaced by a steely resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming her position. It was about setting a precedent, about ensuring that Dominion Federal, the institution she'd poured her life into, wouldn't fall prey to such insidious ambition again. A hush fell over the crowd as she stepped up to the microphone. The faint rustle of leaves in the nearby trees seemed amplified in the sudden quiet. She could feel the weight of their collective gaze, a palpable pressure that would have buckled a lesser woman. But Danielle had always thrived under pressure. It was in the crucible of challenge that her true strength emerged. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice resonating with surprising clarity, cutting through the crisp air. Her internal monologue raged. Could they hear the tremor of anger beneath the calm? Did they see the ghost of the betrayal in her eyes? But her outward demeanor remained composed, professional. "I won't lie. This has been a difficult few days. For all of us." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, giving them weight. Her gaze swept across the assembled faces, searching, assessing. Walter easily stood near the back, his head bowed, his posture a study in contrition. Linda Prescott, ever the shadow, hovered beside him, her expression unreadable. Damon Price, however, met her gaze with a defiance that sent a flicker of cold fury through her veins. He hadn't learned a damn thing. "I've been asked a lot of questions over the past few days," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "About what happened, about why it happened, about what happens next." Her hand, resting lightly on the podium, tightened, the knuckles turning white. "And the question I keep coming back to, the question that matters most, is this: who's accountable?" The question hung in the air, sharp and pointed. A ripple went through the crowd, a murmur of uneasy agreement. Accountability, a word that had been conspicuously absent from the actions of Easley, Prescott, and Price. Danielle took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, steadying her nerves. "This isn't just about me. It's about Dominion Federal. It's about the values we stand for, the integrity we've built over decades." Her voice, though still measured, now carried an undercurrent of steel. And when those values are violated, when that integrity is compromised, we have a responsibility to speak up. She remembered Marion's words, spoken just hours ago. "Don't just address the coup, Danielle. Address the culture that allowed it to happen." Wise words from a wiser woman. "If you ever see something that doesn't feel right," she continued, her gaze locking with Walter's for a fleeting moment, "say something. Even if it's about me. Even if it's about someone more senior. Because silence is complicity. and complicity, her voice dropped a notch, the words imbued with a quiet power, is what allowed this to happen in the first place. The internal echoes of her own betrayal reverberated within. Had she, in some way, fostered this environment? Had her drive for excellence inadvertently created a breeding ground for ambition, for the kind of ruthless maneuvering that had nearly cost her everything? The thought, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at her conscience. This, she knew, was a question she would wrestle with long after the dust settled. She shifted her weight slightly, her gaze sweeping across the crowd once more. The faces before her, a mix of apprehension, curiosity, and a nascent hope, mirrored the complex emotions churning within her own heart. Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, she said, her voice softer now, but no less resolute. It's about being the first one to speak up when everything goes quiet. She paused, letting the silence settle, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Over the next few weeks, we will be implementing new measures to ensure transparency and accountability at every level of this organization. We will be reviewing our internal reporting procedures, strengthening our ethics guidelines, and fostering a culture where every voice is heard and valued. A flicker of something akin to regret crossed Walter's face, a fleeting acknowledgement of the consequences of his actions. Danielle allowed herself a small, inward sigh. Perhaps, just perhaps, something good could come from this. This isn't just about moving forward, she continued, her voice rising again, infused with a renewed energy. It's about moving forward together, about rebuilding trust, about reinforcing the foundations that make Dominion Federal what it is: a strong, resilient, and ethical institution. She held their gazes, a silent promise in her eyes. This wasn't the end of the story. It was a new beginning, and she, Danielle R. Whitaker, was here to lead them through it. The air thrummed with a new energy, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The faces before her, no longer apprehensive, reflected a cautious optimism, a glimmer of the strength and resilience she knew resided within them. And within herself. The coup had failed. Dominion Federal was hers again. Sunlight, sharp and unforgiving, sliced through the blinds, casting zebra stripes across the polished mahogany of her desk. 2 weeks. 2 weeks since they thought they could erase her. 2 weeks since Deshawn, his face a mask of bewildered obedience, had barred her from her own building. The memory still pricked, a splinter beneath the skin of her composure. But the sting had dulled, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Her fingers, tipped with the same crimson as the power suit she now wore, tapped a rhythmic beat against a single sheet of paper, the outline for her next press conference. Dominion Federal. Her Dominion Federal. They had tried to steal it, to dismantle her legacy brick by agonizing brick, but they hadn't accounted for one thing. Danielle R. Whitaker didn't break. She rebuilt. The office, her sanctuary, felt different now. Not violated, precisely, beautist. As though the very air molecules remembered the intrusion, the echoing footsteps of Walter, Linda, Damon, the triumvirate of treachery. She inhaled slowly, the scent of old leather and new beginnings intertwining. Walter had actually had the audacity to call, stammering apologies veiled in self-preservation. It wasn't personal, Danielle. It was business. The words rang hollow, even in memory. Had he truly believed she by that tired excuse? Business. As if betraying years of mentorship, of trust meticulously built, could ever be reduced to such a sterile term. The faintest ghost of a smile touched her lips. He'd learn. They all would. The press conference. This wasn't just about reclaiming her position. It was about reshaping the narrative. They had painted her as reckless, unstable, a liability. They whispered in the shadows, hoping to erode her credibility, to poison the well of public opinion. They always do, she murmured, the words barely audible above the rhythmic hum of the air conditioning. Marion, her lawyer, a woman forged from steel and meticulous legal precedent, had warned her. They'll come after your reputation, Danielle. It's the oldest trick in the book. Marion's words, crisp and pragmatic, had been a lifeline in the tumultuous days that followed the lockout. They always do, Marion had reiterated, her voice a steady counterpoint to the chaotic storm brewing around them. But next time we won't be quiet. And quiet she would not be. This press conference wasn't just about exoneration. It was a declaration, a promise. She wouldn't just return. She'd return stronger, more resolute. The outline on her desk was more than just a schedule of talking points. It was a blueprint for the future of Dominion Federal. A future where transparency and ethical leadership weren't just buzzwords, but the very foundation upon which the bank would operate. A soft knock broke the silence. Linda Prescott stood hesitantly in the doorway, her face a study in carefully constructed remorse. "Danielle," she began, her voice a practiced blend of contrition and apprehension. "I just wanted to—" Danielle raised a hand, silencing her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Linda shifted her weight, her carefully tailored suit doing little to disguise the tremor in her hands. "You wanted a what, Linda?" Danielle asked, her voice deceptively calm, the words dripping with ice. Linda flinched, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of Danielle's gaze. "To apologize," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape route. "For everything." Danielle's gaze remained unwavering. Apologies. Empty words from a woman who had so readily betrayed her trust. Apologies are for children, Linda. Actions speak louder. The coldness in Danielle's tone was deliberate, calculated. Linda swallowed, her throat bobbing nervously. I understand," she stammered, "but I was just following orders." Danielle finished, her voice edged with steel. Linda's silence was confirmation enough. Danielle allowed a sliver of a smile to play on her lips. "They don't get to write the ending. I do." The words hung in the air, a promise and a threat all rolled into one. Linda's eyes widened, a flicker of fear replacing the carefully crafted remorse. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, defeated. With a final, lingering look, she turned and fled, the click of her heels echoing in the hallway. Danielle turned back to the outline on her desk, her mind already racing ahead, strategizing, planning. The press conference would be more than just a rebuttal. It would be a rebirth. She would lay bare the board's illegal maneuvers, their backroom dealings, their desperate attempt to usurp control. And she would do it with the same meticulous precision and unwavering determination that had built Dominion Federal into the powerhouse it was. She thought of Deshawn, the young security guard, caught in the crossfire. He'd been a pawn, easily manipulated by those in power. He'd apologized profusely, his eyes filled with genuine regret. She'd accepted his apology, recognizing the difference between blind obedience and malicious intent. He was a reminder that loyalty wasn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about simply doing what was right, even in the face of pressure. "Loyalty isn't about smiling in someone's face," she murmured, the words a mantra echoing in the quiet of her office. "It's about remembering who gave you your seat when no one else would." The sun, now higher in the sky, bathed the room in a warm, golden light. The zebra stripes across her desk seemed to shift and dance, a silent testament to the changing tides. She felt a surge of something akin to exhilaration. They had underestimated her. They had mistaken her compassion for weakness, her trust for naivete. They had forgotten that the woman who had built an empire from the ground up wasn't afraid of a fight. She was ready. The biting October wind whipped Danielle's hair across her face, a familiar caress that echoed the tumultuous weeks behind her. She adjusted the microphone, the cold metal a stark reminder of the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Below, a sea of faces, journalists, employees, curious onlookers all turned towards her, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and something akin to awe. Dominion Federal's imposing glass facade gleamed behind her, a silent testament to the battle she'd just fought and won. She hadn't imagined, even a month ago, that she'd be standing here, reclaiming her own company. The taste of betrayal was still acrid on her tongue, a bitter counterpoint to the sweet tang of victory. A faint tremor ran through her. Not fear, she told herself, pushing the sensation down. This wasn't fear, it was the electric hum of adrenaline, the thrill of being back in the arena. She met Marion's gaze in the crowd, a small, reassuring nod passing between them. Her lawyer, a steady rock in the storm, had been instrumental in navigating the legal minefield that Easley and Prescott had laid for her. Ready, Marion mouthed. Danielle inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs, and exhaled slowly, releasing the last vestiges of doubt. She was ready. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the wind's whispers. She saw a ripple of movement in the crowd, a collective straightening of spines, a focusing of attention. They were hers again, her people, her company. A fierce pride surged within her, a powerful antidote to the lingering sting of betrayal. "I stand before you today, not just as the CEO of Dominion Federal, but as a testament to the enduring power of truth and resilience," Danielle continued, her words echoing across the plaza. She could see Walter easily watching from a window high above, his face a mask of strained neutrality. Linda Prescott stood beside him, a shadow of her former confident self. Let them watch, Danielle thought, a flicker of grim satisfaction crossing her face. Let them witness the consequences of their greed and short-sightedness. What they're getting is something bigger, a real conversation about trust, power, and how quickly we forget the people who make it possible for us to be where we are. The words resonated within her, a truth she had learned the hard way. Trust, she realized, was a currency easily counterfeited, and power, a dangerous intoxicant. She glanced towards Deshawn, the young security guard who'd been manipulated into locking her out, now standing on the periphery of the crowd, his expression a mixture of shame and relief. He was a casualty, not a conspirator, a reminder that true power lay not in wielding authority, but in empowering others. "This isn't about me. It's about every employee who has ever felt overlooked, every innovator whose voice has been silenced, every customer whose trust has been betrayed." She saw heads nodding in the crowd, a silent chorus of agreement. They understood. They had felt it too. The pervasive culture of fear that Easley and his cohort had cultivated had stifled innovation and eroded the very foundation of the bank. It ended now. Never sign away your power just to make people feel comfortable. The words hung in the air, sharp and uncompromising. She knew they would resonate far beyond the confines of Dominion Federal. This wasn't just about corporate intrigue. It was about a fundamental human truth, the need to own one's voice, one's worth, one's power. She thought of all the times she'd compromised, smoothed things over, chosen the path of least resistance, and a wave of self-reproach washed over her. No more. A reporter shouted a question about the board's complicity in the attempted coup. Danielle paused, letting the question hang in the air for a beat, building the suspense. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the hunger for answers. "The investigation is ongoing," she replied evenly, her voice carrying a steel edge. "But let me be clear. No more silence. No more shadows." She held their gazes, her eyes unwavering. "Every stone will be turned. Every question will be answered. And everyone responsible will be held accountable." The words resonated with the force of a promise, a vow etched in stone. Another reporter, bolder than the rest, pressed further, questioning her ability to lead after such a public display of internal strife. A faint smile played on Danielle's lips. "Try me," she said, the two words a quiet challenge, an invitation to witness the strength forged in the crucible of adversity. The smile widened, transforming into something radiant, something that spoke not of arrogance, but of unshakable self-belief. The wind whipped around her, no longer a chilling reminder of the storm, but a symbol of the change she was ushering in, a cleansing force that would sweep away the debris of the past and pave the way for a new era of transparency, accountability, and true leadership. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound that washed over her, carrying her forward, buoying her with their renewed faith. This wasn't just a victory, it was a rebirth. She had built her table, and she was damn well going to sit at its head. The city lights painted streaks across the glass walls of her office, a fractured, glittering reflection of the day's tumultuous events. Danielle sat at her desk, the polished mahogany surface gleaming under the soft glow of a single lamp. The air, still tinged with the lingering scent of celebratory champagne from the impromptu toast downstairs, felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. Across from her, Grace Price, her lawyer, and now, she realized with a strange pang of affection, something akin to a wartime confidant, sipped her tea, the porcelain cup cradled in her hands. Danielle watched her, the quiet grace of the woman a stark contrast to the chaotic day they'd endured. Grace had been a rock, a steady presence amidst the storm. Her calm, measured words, her precise legal maneuvers, had been the anchor Danielle hadn't realized she needed. "It's late," Grace finally said, her voice a gentle murmur that cut through Danielle's thoughts. "You should go home." Danielle's gaze shifted to the cityscape outside, the twinkling lights blurring into an indistinct tapestry of light and shadow. Home. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. This sterile, impersonal office felt more like a sanctuary than her sprawling, empty house ever could. "Not yet," she replied, her voice rougher than she intended. The day's events played out in her mind, a dizzying reel of betrayal, anger, and ultimately, triumph. The sting of Walter's betrayal was still raw, a festering wound beneath the carefully constructed armor of her composure. She had mentored him, groomed him for success, only to have him turn on her with the swift, calculated precision of a viper. The memory of his face, contorted in a mask of ambition and fear, sent a shiver down her spine. Grace's gaze, sharp and perceptive, held a flicker of understanding. "They try to break you, Danielle." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. A wry smile touched Danielle's lips. "They always do." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of past battles, past betrayals. The world of high finance was a battlefield, and she had fought her way to the top, clawing for every inch of ground, every ounce of respect. She'd made enemies, powerful enemies, and they'd always been waiting for an opportunity to bring her down. But next time, Grace continued, her voice hardening with a steel Danielle rarely saw, "We won't be quiet." The resolve in Grace's voice resonated with something deep inside Danielle, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Danielle nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Silence descended again, but this time, it wasn't the heavy silence of exhaustion, but the charged silence of shared understanding, of a battle fought and won, of a war still raging. The press conference, a carefully orchestrated performance of strength and resilience, had been a masterpiece. She'd exposed the board's illegal maneuvers, their desperate attempt to seize control, with a calculated calm that had sent shockwaves through the financial world. The public, always hungry for a David and Goliath story, had rallied to her side. The shareholders, swayed by her unwavering confidence and the damning evidence she presented, had voted overwhelmingly to reinstate her. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Danielle ran a hand through her hair, the smooth, cool strands a welcome sensation against her heated skin. The exhaustion was beginning to seep into her bones, a dull ache that radiated outwards from the core of her being. She had poured every ounce of her energy into reclaiming her position, into ensuring the stability of Dominion Federal. The bank wasn't just a business. It was her legacy, a testament to her vision, her unwavering belief in ethical, sustainable finance. It was a shield she held up against the predatory practices that had nearly brought the global economy to its knees a decade ago. And she would not let anyone, not even her hand-picked executives, dismantle it. "They don't get to write the ending," Danielle said, her voice low and steady, the words imbued with a steely conviction that echoed in the quiet office. "I do." She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the faces of her employees, the relief, the hope that had flickered in their eyes when she'd addressed them after the vote. Their loyalty, their faith in her leadership, was a fuel that burned hotter than any ambition. Grace smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "And what ending do you have in mind, Danielle?" Danielle opened her eyes, her gaze settling on the city lights once more. The fractured reflections seemed to coalesce, sharpening into a clear, focused image. "An ending where Dominion Federal thrives," she said, her voice resonating with a newfound strength. "An ending where ethical banking isn't just a dream, but a reality. An ending where the people who try to silence me regret it." The last words were spoken softly, almost a whisper, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. Grace stood, gathering her things. "Power isn't about being feared, Danielle," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's about being remembered." Danielle watched her go, the words echoing in the stillness of the office. Remembered, not for her wealth, not for her position, but for the impact she made, the change she brought about. That was the legacy she wanted to leave behind. That was the ending she would write. The city lights, no longer fractured, shone with a steady, unwavering brilliance. Danielle stood, a renewed sense of purpose coursing through her veins. The battle was over. The war had just begun, and she was ready,